Hey, what's up you guys? The Curious Owl here, and today I am here to review Danse Macabre by Stephen King. So Danse Macabre is part of a Stephen King reading series that I have been doing on my channel here for the last about almost a year and a half. I had taken a break in about middle of February going into March, and so I had missed quite a few of the books that I had basically read over the course of that break. So because I basically had taken that break and hadn't really been able to share my thoughts with you guys on much in terms of this, I decided I was going to do some catch-up reviews before releasing my next vlog that I have, which is going to be for the Dark Tower series. I have this and then one other video that I'm going to be making before the Dark Tower series comes out, but be rest assured that is coming. I'm very excited about it. So if you're not familiar with my Stephen King reading series and are maybe tuning into it for the first time through this review, let me run it down for you really quick. So my Stephen King reading series is basically a month-to-month reading challenge where I try to read every book, every novel specifically, that Stephen King has published chronologically. The exception being that if there are books that are parts of series, I will read the series in its entirety before moving on to the next chronologically published book. So that's kind of the idea that we have with this. Now, Danse Macabre is actually the first nonfiction piece that we have from Stephen when he is writing in the 1980s. Now, I believe this one came out, and I want to say about 1982. Several of his books actually had come out over the course of 1982 between his own published name and his published name, Richard Bachman, which was his pseudonym. Danse Macabre, though, was under his actual real name, and it's the first nonfiction piece we've ever seen from him because it's essentially where he talks about the horror genre when it comes to movies, TV shows, and specifically books, and talking about the different themes about them, and especially looking at it from the lens of viewership in terms of a horror movie as opposed to a horror TV show, as opposed to a horror book, how those particular themes are brought about in different ways through those different mediums, and then also on top of that, the overall complicated nature of each medium, and how, for instance, a horror movie is a lot more complex in some ways than a book is, and how sometimes a book has much more meaningful messages in it than a movie or a TV show does. It's a very well thought out kind of idea of looking at the entirety of a genre that started all the way back in the 1800s with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And he does actually reference several of his own favorites as he has grown up. He was a huge horror fan, which is why he became one of the biggest names in the horror genre. Now, one of his favorite things was horror movies. He talks about as a kid, he would go to the movies very often in order to watch horror movies, and was a huge fan of franchises like the Freddy Krueger franchise, the Jason franchise, all of those really popular, cheesy seeming almost horror movies that people tell you are the staples of horror movies. He's seen almost every single one of them, has read almost every single book there is, has seen almost every paranormal, supernatural, horror-based TV show that there is. I thought that because of the depth of King's knowledge, he really brought to the table a lot of interesting complexities, especially about the history and the creation of things, of like horror movies and TV shows more specifically. Because I was not always someone who was interested in horror. I'm not a scary movie kind of person. I never have been. The one exception being The Mummy, because I've seen that movie several times over the course of my childhood that it no longer phases me. But I can't watch like the Alien movies. I can't watch Freddy Krueger for some reason. I'm not there yet. This book did actually make it a lot more approachable to me because I think that understanding the nuances of these different pieces of literature and different pieces of fiction in different mediums, it was so much easier to feel like I could approach these movies with the intent behind it of learning about the story, of building on the lore, especially of the supernatural based ones. And I just really appreciated how this book was truly from the heart of a horror fan. It was a complete love letter to the horror genre and looking at its faults, looking at its flaws, but also looking at the shining parts of it. And also how there are some people who are, really good at making horror things and some people who aren't, and understanding the nuances as to why those things that are not so good aren't good compared to the ones that are really good, and making basically a real pros and cons list of why certain things work and certain things don't. And this is just absolutely amazing because I feel like there is no other way to talk about this than to talk about it as a love letter to the genre itself. Because to say anything else about it would basically be a lie, because that's all it is it's a lot of King talking about his experience with this genre and seeing these things and reading things, and then essentially looking at the complexities of each individual thing, from the character archetypes to the plot structures that are used in various horror movies, the kinds of characters that you're going to come up against other than the archetypes themselves, the kinds of supernatural aspects that are involved with it. He goes into every single piece, every single movie, TV show, book as it's the same kind of story, and looks at it from a complex standpoint of looking at all of the characters, the plot development. He's so critical though of a lot of it that it almost makes it seem like he is just kind of almost snobby in terms of the way that he talks about some of these movies, especially the ones where he's not as big of a fan of. But if anything, to me, what that tells me is that he has such a big love for this genre that he has found exactly what he knows he likes, and he talks about the issues he does have and doesn't make it so that it's necessarily a bad review of the movie or book or TV show, but it talks about the essence of horror to him and how something doesn't match up with that, and gives actual credible reasons as to why. And I think that's why it's one of the reasons I really enjoyed this, because I just feel like it truthfully gave the horror genre the kind of love it needed and really made it so much more accessible to people who are not as involved in the horror genre. But it also was complete fanfare for a lot of people who already loved the horror genre. People who love horror could read this book and really love all of the things that King picks out about these individual books and movies, because they are likely things that they pick up on these things as well if they are as big of horror fans as Steven is. Now, I will say I only did give this book about 3 stars, and with all of the positive things I've said about it, there were some drawbacks. One being, this book was way too long. It felt like a bunch of nothing for a lot of points, and I feel like the reason it felt so long was because King would spend at least 30 pages per chapter just talking about a lot of nothing, or if it was about something, he would be essentially circling the same point over and over and over and over and over again. And to me, while that was really cool, I felt like I really wanted him to just kind of get more to the point about a lot of stuff. And the places where he did kind of get more to the point about a lot of stuff, it was really good. It was really, interesting. It was actually very accessible, like I said, to someone who has not really been a fan of the horror genre other than with Stephen King and like The Mummy, for instance. But I feel like this book in general could have been cut down significantly, and I just felt like there was so much that he said that kind of was just a lot of white noise to me. Yeah, those are my thoughts on Danse Macabre. Like I said, I gave it a 3-star. It wasn't awful. I just felt like I said, a lot of it was just noise. Let me know what you guys thought of Danse Macabre down in the comments below. This is, like I said, the first non-fiction book that King had ever published, and I would like to know your guys' thoughts on it. Did it get you really involved into the horror genre? Did you want to go watch these movies and read these books at all when you had first read it? Or if you're reading it much more recently, do you have an idea of what he would say about some of the more recent horror movies and books that have come out over time? I would really like to see both ends of that spectrum if we can get it, because I have some thoughts of what he would say about some of these newer horror movies, and I'm gonna say not all of it is positive. So anyway, thank you all so much for joining me today. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to be and would like to see more videos like this, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!